Sales SOS podcast. And I want to introduce you to everybody really quickly. This is a group of people that got together doing Clubhouse during COVID. And we thought we would bring the Clubhouse magic to you via podcast. So let me introduce everybody here. Brynne Tillman. Bill Gannon.
Hello.
Renee Bigelow. John Way.
Hello, everyone.
Jeff Bajorek.
Hey, hey.
Mike Simmons.
Hello.
And Chris Bowen, who his camera has decided not to work for him today. So can you say hi, Chris? You can't hear him either. He'll join us at some point. Okay, so this group is going to get together with a few other people on a regular basis, and we're going to bring to you the Sales SOS podcast. And today we're going to talk specifically about using AI in sales. So I want to start with just sort of a generic question. Everybody's talking about AI. Everybody's talking about it. Everybody thinks they need to be doing something. So what is everybody doing? So let's just sort of start. I don't know who wants to start the conversation. Maybe Jeff. What's going on with AI? I'm just going to surprise everybody.
Okay.
What's going on with AI in sales, and why is everybody talking about it?
Because it's the most exciting thing that we've seen in a long time. Because I've talked to people who think its impact will be on par with that of electricity. Think about that.
Wow.
And because it's a very emotionally polarizing concept, you've got people who are so inspired by it that they can't contain themselves. And you have people who are so afraid of it that they don't want to touch it. And whenever you have something really polarizing like that, you're going to get some emotional responses. And I've got some clients actually that specialize in creating and working with AI for their clients, custom software and consulting clients. And some of the takeaways that they have come up with, though, and I think this is really interesting, and I think this will jive. I'm curious to see what the rest of the panel thinks here, but they really categorize it on par with an intern. It's skilled, there's potential, but if you just let it go on its own, you're not going to get very good results. And so it requires diligent training. It requires patience. It requires a few deep breaths and recognizing where your inputs may have not produced desirable outputs. But AI is still a tool to do things that we want it to do. It's not off on its own yet, certainly not with sales AI. And I can still tell there are some, let's just say there are some definite tells when AI is doing the communicating versus when a person is.
Yeah, it's so funny because independently, that was the term I came up with yesterday talking to somebody about AI, is it's like an intern. It can do certain things, but should never be left unchecked.
Yes.
So, Mike, I want to jump to you real quickly. Brynne, I'm going to ask you to talk to us a little bit about LinkedIn a little bit, of course. But
really?
So, Mike, what are you thinking? What are you hearing? How are people reacting to this whole idea of AI in sales?
Well, I don't ever want to follow Bajorek again. So
we're all done now.
I could tell you. Well, I could tell you what I'm doing with it, and it's more about how do we use it to augment and amplify what the human can do. And we just went through a process of building a logo on something, and the way that we were able to communicate with the person who is helping us do the design work on the logo was prompt Dolly, get some information, then figure out which ones we like, and then share that with the person and say, this is what we'd like to add to it. And the feedback I got from the person was, hey, the tool did a lot of the heavy lifting. It's still ours because we had someone do the hand-drawn work associated with it, and they did an amazing job, and it was able to incorporate the colors. But I think this is the way that tool is supposed to be. It can be used internally. The other way that we use it is, for those of you who've been around me long enough, you know that I have a weird way of saying things, and I also think that everybody else can keep up. So when Jen wants me to translate things, I put some stuff into ChatGPT and then ask it to translate it into a different set of words, which helps. And it starts to change the way that we're able to communicate. So I think it's a tool that we can use to do really good things. But like any tools, a hammer in the hands of the wrong person can be a really bad thing. This tool can be a really bad thing if it's used by the wrong person for the wrong intent, or the wrong organization for the wrong intent.
Oh yeah. And we're talking about wrong intent. You start thinking about hacking and security, and we get down a whole nother really frightening path. But let's go back to AI in sales. Brynne, tell me, what are you thinking about? What are you seeing? What are people saying? I know there's a lot of talk about it in LinkedIn.
Yeah. So AI for sales can really fall under 5 or 6 different buckets. There's messaging, right? There's email campaigns. There's content. There's I'm stuck. This is an objection that my client just gave me, and I don't know how to overcome it. Right? Like I could have scripts for video. I could go on and on and on. We're using it for all of those reasons in bits and pieces. Oh, you can use this to comment on a piece of content, which I don't 100% love right now. I could talk about that. But here is how we're really using it in a way that I think is a combination of authentic and compelling at the same time. We're interviewing our clients on Zoom, and we're taking a 3 to 5 minute rant on a topic. And then we're putting it in ChatGPT. So use this transcript only, do not research. Come up with a blog post, come up with a LinkedIn poll. We have prompts that do this, right? So we have a prompt that we've created that I could put in a transcript, and it'll put out a poll and the text for the poll, the hashtags for the poll, all that stuff, right? So coming up with prompts that can work with a transcript. And that's how we can get authentic to the seller's voice. At the same time, we can create content at scale. So that's just kind of the beginning. I can go deeper on any of those at any given time. So just call back when you're ready for that.
And Renee, I'm going to ask you to add on to that, because you've been talking a little bit about like how to really kind of key into the right voice and setting up your AI to do that.
Yeah. So I got lucky and fell in with a bunch of GPT-3 geeks early on in 2021. So I've been working with AI in marketing and sales for a while. Here are some places I feel like really work well. First of all, really, you need to think of things that are no one right answer. When you are looking for fact-based, then you start worrying about things like hallucinations. But if you are looking for things where there's no one right answer, it's a really great tool, and you have to be less worried about the risk there, right? So one of the top uses that I work with sales teams on is getting a really good prompt into the voice of the target persona. And your marketing team and your sales management can really help with that. And they can help create some good prompts that the rest of the sales team can use to practice some role playing and some specific situations that you get into. And you can tweak them from there. So like if your sales management and your brand team get together and give you a really good target persona, but someone's just a little bit different, like you can change that prompt and kind of say, well, this guy's a little bit of a cynic. So this is my target persona, but they're a little bit cynical about this. And so I want to make sure to, tiptoe their way into something. So you can really tweak those. And then you can add in a competitive analysis. So let's say you've gotten past your first call or your discovery calls and you're getting into some consideration and they bring up competitors. So you're going to be talking about that with them next. You can take your battle cards or any other, even if you only have the public pricing information, you can scrape your competitor's website for their public packaging, pricing, any of that feature set. And then you can put your own in and ask the AI to do a comparison for you. And it'll give you blind spots that you aren't thinking of, especially if you put it in the language, in the target persona's perspective, right? You'll get some natural language back from what your target persona, some of that language they might be using, as Mike pointed out earlier, translating, right? Like you're getting it to translate in your target persona. So those are a couple that competitive analysis and that initial like kind of discovery call target persona thing that I think are really great. And One of the ways you can kind of help keep that consistency and make it a little bit better than an intern is if the input is coming from people with strategic knowledge, and then it's being used by people to upskill them. So you're kind of transferring that on over in an always on capacity. So a lot of the stuff I do after hours, right? Like I don't mind doing a chat with, any of the AIs while I'm watching a movie with my family or whatever. Like that's kind of normal. I kind of multitask a decent amount. So it's always on, right? So if I have a meeting the next day and I kind of want to work something out, or I'm writing something and I want to make sure it's in the right voice for the target persona, that I'm not using jargon that they wouldn't recognize, that always on piece. So I have that strategic input in the beginning, can transfer it across, and it's always on.
Thanks, Renee. I want to jump to Chris though for a second, because Renee sort of led us into this sales management, the sales leadership discussion, and using AI in sales leadership. And Chris, how are you using it with your team?
Well, I think probably the easiest way is, how is it that you're able to get more of your message aligned with your exact customer? Because the language that we're going to have typically from our marketing teams is a little bit generic, right? Because it's focusing either industry specific or particular role specific, but it's not getting it to that specific customer at that one customer or prospect, right? And so being able to leverage both our content and the voice of that particular customer is probably the best way I've found to use it. But there's other things that we also can do. If you look at some of the other applications that are out there, you can get fairly quick, high level information on a target account or a target person if their information's obviously in the overall web. And so being able to leverage it there to be able to get a quick hit. If you had an inbound lead that you weren't expecting, you've never done anything with this customer or this particular person before, you don't have any connections there, how is it that I can get up to speed with them, but still be able to respond quick enough so that lead doesn't go from warm right now to cold in very short time, right?
Thanks. Bill, I want to jump up to you now, because we're talking about voice, right? We're talking about speaking, and you're our expert. So how do you see AI helping people with expressing themselves better voice, more understandable? What kinds of things are you thinking about?
Yeah, we're always after people being as communicative, as clear as they can be. So let me put a big red circle with a line across. Do not recite anything that comes back from ChatGPT. Do not consider that your sales script, okay? Because it requires tons of auditing and checking and making sure, most importantly, that it's authentic to your voice. Liz, this goes back to sales DNA that your dad talks about. You want to be your authentic voice. You want to communicate to customers in an authentic way. Having said that, you and I, we all know that we are charged with contacting customers at times that we don't know that much about. Even if we can get standard online, ChatGPT is fantastic, I think, for at least doing those light lifting prompts like salesperson calling on Autodesk for the first time, interested in selling software. What would a script look like? And watch what comes back. It'll blow your mind. Don't read that, just study it and understand it. And I think it's a good shortcut. And we're all about Cliff Notes, right? Fastest way to get to the sale. I think we're always about shortcuts, and it's a great first step shortcut. Gets you down the field to the 30-yard line, 50-yard line right away. And then it's up to you to do the rest of it. But in terms of folks who are always looking for the content that they can wrap their own voice around, I think it's become a really handy tool.
Yeah.
Autodesk, not yet a sponsor of the program, but if anybody knows anybody.
But
Autodesk, we would love.
Podcast is brought to you by the nice folks at Autodesk.
This is what happens in a sales podcast.
Immediately go into sales mode.
Right.
No, I think you're right, and I think that it starts taking us into this direction of what do we need to look up and get to quickly? So can I find information about the person I'm speaking to? Can I find information about my competition? Can I think of a next cue or a thing to say to a client that maybe I haven't thought of? Like, how do we use it to prompt creativity as opposed to thinking it is the creative? Because it is not the creative. It is only regurgitating what's already in it. There's nothing creative or new, right?
Well, and
So,
its creative could be a hallucination, right?
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yes. Do not submit it as a legal brief. That's our lesson number 1, right?
And Liz, here's just a quick counterpoint to that, or put in a prompt about a key competitor making the same pitch and see what it comes back with. It very well could expose something on your competitor. You may want to validate, of course, but it may grab something that goes, okay. If in fact it's legit and that's a claim and it sounds like it's meaty, you might want to think about how you protect your value prop in light of that. So
And understanding our competitor, understanding our client better. We never want to do the work. What's going on with our client? What's going on in the news? What's happened with them lately, right? Now you put that in and it pulls stuff up that's relevant. Again, fact check, but you have a starting place. So John, I have not forgotten you, but I'm waiting for the John is our tech guru. The most tech savvy of us by about 100 times. So what are you thinking about? How are you using this? What are you thinking about how it should be used in sales? What are your thoughts?
Actually, it's interesting you brought up the question about using AI to prompt creativity. So the biggest thing that I've seen with some of our customers is that they would say, okay, let's say that I'm doing a white paper, for example, or I want to do a blog post, for example, about this particular topic. They would say, give me 3 different perspectives, and then I'm going to pick which ones that I like, potentially. Really interesting. So I thought that was a really interesting, as again, to your point, Liz, about prompting creativity. It gives you 3 different perspectives that you could potentially think about. The second one that kind of echoes back to Renee, what Renee was talking about was not only that, but let's suppose that you're writing this blog article in 3 different voices. One is a millennial, one is business professional, one is journalistic. Like, what does that look like? And so again, it really helps you think about like how you're going to write this particular piece of article or blog or something like that, which I thought was very interesting. So Bill kind of talked about like having, don't regurgitate it, which is what we, definitely espouse, but having the AI to generate these different versions, like version 1, version 2, version 3, that was really insightful. And that really definitely prompts the creativity. And to kind of harken back to Jeff, when you were talking about like treating AI as like an intern, one thing that actually bubbled up as part of this was the fact that I think a lot of people forget how hard it is to communicate expectations to an intern. Like, you can't just be a one-liner and it just comes back. It doesn't work that way. And literally, if you just tell that to the AI, they will do that, and it's going to be wrong. So you have to really think about what you're trying to ask the intern to do. And I thought your example of the intern was so brilliant.
Thank you. And Brynne, I know you have something to add, but I have literally given specific prompts to AI, particularly in DALL-E, and then it'll come back and it'll produce an image that says it includes this and includes this. And I have prompted it back. Both of those are incorrect. Please try again. Like, the thing doesn't even spell its own prompts right in the images sometimes. And we do have these expectations that, hey, this is the next level intelligence. It's got superhuman capabilities. Of course it's going to get no, it doesn't get a lot of this stuff right. And I have one more thing to add, but Brynne, I want you to go first.
Oh, well, one of the things you can do is you can ask ChatGPT to help you prompt. So when I'm in ChatGPT and I go in and I ask it something and it doesn't respond, I will say, I'm a little confused. This is what I was looking for. What prompt should I have used? And literally ChatGPT will help me communicate better with itself.
Go ahead, Renee.
I want to add on to what John said. I think it is such an important point that one sentence is not enough direction to get high quality work, right? And this is going to be a little controversial, so it might make a lot of people uncomfortable. But what you put in those prompts and how little you put in, or garbage in, garbage out, essentially, is going to be a reflection on your relationship to the work, right? Like, so we get better if we make the AI better, and it makes us more clear, regardless of what it gives us back. It reflects back to us. It gets us in the right headspace to have the conversation. It literally, so I built some GPTs for the GPT store on OpenAI, on ChatGPT. And literally the whole flow and the whole reason that I built them out is because people take a lot of shortcuts with things that are important but tedious.
Mhm.
And so, like, it forces you, it's programmed to force you into saying, who is your target audience? What is the goal? What is this for? Right? Like, but in a conversational way, because we don't always do that. And I'm guilty of it as well. And I think it forces you into thinking that through, which gets you ready for a conversation with a human.
I think one of the coolest things about it is I can screw up on that and then go back and reprompt at that level and then see what changes as we go down different branching scenarios.
Yeah.
I am unable to do that with my wife. One day, I hope that happens, and we'll be able to communicate in that manner where I can kind of push the rewind and go backward. And to the point that Brynne was talking about with the how would you prompt it, what we've actually used is ChatGPT to create a prompt that we then drop into DALL-E. So now we're getting the information from one, applying it in another context. And then Renee, what did you say that was controversial?
I know, I was waiting.
That most people don't want to hear that it's their own foibles of why they aren't getting better work from technology or from a person.
So that would just be truth. I don't know if that's controversial.
Look in the mirror.
The truth is undefeated. Here's
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Let's argue about it. Here's what this is just a little bit of personal experience on my or from my point of view. I looked at AI as something with so much capability, and I don't know. I'm curious the rest of you. There's so much capability. I didn't know where to start. I didn't know what was possible. I saw people doing things around me, and I'm like, wow, that's really, I wouldn't have thought of that, and wow, I wouldn't have thought of that. My challenge to anybody listening right now, especially if you lead a company, play with this. Spend the $20 a month for GPT, spend whatever. The stuff is affordable. I don't care which language model you use. I don't care if you're an Anthropic person or an OpenAI person, or you want to go Copilot or Gemini, whatever. None of those are sponsors of this program, by the way.
Not yet.
Play around with this stuff and see what is possible, because when we get to creativity, when we get to prompting, the more you play with it, the more you're going to recognize tangibly what is possible. And only then can you really let your creative juices flow, and can you really see what this thing is capable of. We get to direct what this does. And the barrier to entry is very low. You're either in on this thing or you are going to be lapped by this thing. And there's just, there's no reason not to. And so if you lead a company, you should be playing around with this, and you should probably have somebody in your company playing around with this with designated time to just go nuts. I know that sounds scary. That's probably more controversial than the truth, but like, let somebody go nuts with this and see what it can do. And that's the kind of innovation that it's going to take to really stay ahead.
Yeah. And I think you're right about CEOs or leaders, like just letting somebody else do it and assuming that they know what they're doing is dangerous, because if you haven't played with it and you don't understand what it can do, what it might do, what it sometimes does, you're not really going to be able to lead your team. It's sort of like saying, yeah, just go ahead and engineer this for me, but I don't know what is going to go into that, so I'm not going to worry about it. Right. So any last thoughts about sort of generally using AI in sales, things we should think about or include? Yeah, Renee, go ahead. Jump in.
Yeah, I have another one that I think is really, really important, because we've talked about kind of leading up to conversations, there's another flip side of that I think is really big, which is if you have recordings, Brynne brought up transcripts earlier, right? So if you have recordings of conversations that you've had with customers, there's a gold mine in there of unstructured data, right? We have their natural language patterns. We have the things that they're telling us. There are so many signals that customers give us for product development, for marketing, for sales, for customer success, all of these signals that are regularly missed or not shared because the person in the conversation doesn't understand how important those things are for other things. Now you get a repository of, so let's just use a SaaS company as an example. There are lots of demos. There are lots of demos recorded. Ethically, there should be permission on recordings. I'm not going to go deep into that, but let's make sure. So you can also just strip out the names. There's no need to identify the file with the person's name, right? Like, so we're not putting PII or personal identifiable information in. We're taking that's one of our risks, right? That we would spill someone else's secrets or something. So particularly if we're working with a corporate account that doesn't include training data, then we're in a much better position now. We can take these recordings from our customers and put a bunch of them in, and we can start looking for trends that inform us for lots of things. But almost always that's coming from sales, because sales has the contact with the customer more often. Might be customer success, still a form of sales, right? But there's a lot of gold in that.
So that's the other side of AI, though, that, we're sort of talking about the prompting side of it. And we're going to talk in a minute about some of the other things that it can do. But this whole idea of pulling out the information in a sea of data, and whether it's video or whether it's audio or whether it's data of some other sort, AI can do that in a time frame and in a way that people just can't match. And we don't think about that as much when we're thinking about AI right now, because it's so new to us, I think.
And you can assign the different roles too, right? So you have that in all that unstructured data. Let's say you have, 100 customer interviews that you put together. You have all those transcripts, you put them in one place. Now you can say, okay, I'm the product manager. Like, what are some trends that I should be aware of? I'm the head of marketing. What are some trends? So this is something a CEO can do to kind of get play around and understand a little more, get closer to their customer, right? In a different way. I'm the head of marketing. What are some things that I should see, or some trends here? I'm, going on a sales call. What are some things I might want to, so you can just change your own persona as you're interacting with it each time too.
Okay. Any final words? Who wants to wrap up our discussion about AI in sales?
You mean the very last word to ever be said about AI in sales? Like no one can follow it.
Are you sure? Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
Oh, then don't look at me.
Which has been said is just play with it. If you are not embracing AI, I guarantee you are going to fall behind. It just is. There's no way you'll be able to stay competitive if you're not embracing it. So just kind of let it, you don't have to own every inch of it, but start playing with it and start seeing how it can enhance your business and help you keep a competitive edge.
I think that's I'm gonna wrap this up with the final word then. But I think that we're so worried about, is AI going to replace me? And I think that one of the key things here is you will be replaced if you don't learn to use AI, right? Because other people will be leveraging it to improve their game. So you've got to step up. Don't worry about it replacing you. Right now, worry about, how do I use it to make me better at what I do, whatever that is. Okay, let's wrap this one up. So whoever's cutting this, we're going to cut this here. I want to now start talking about specific tools. So I have a list of some different ones that we can talk about, but I kind of want to jump around again and just see what specific tools are you guys using besides ChatGPT? And then we can talk about some of the other ones that I've researched and see what games you guys have played with those, or how much you've interacted with them. Does that work for you guys?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so we're going to jump right in. This is Sales SOS podcast, and we're talking about using AI in sales. And this is our second podcast. about using AI in sales. And we're going to talk now about specific tools that you can use in sales, again, to really improve your game. How do I bring my team up to another level using AI tools, or how do I bring my personal game up using AI tools? So let's jump in. And does somebody want to start this conversation? Brynne, start us out.
Okay, I'm obsessed with a Chrome extension called getmagical.com. It does a lot of things, but it's a short code extension, meaning that we can add lots and lots of content, and with a quick couple strokes of the keyboard, it will automatically bring that content up. I am using this for my prompts. So when I have a really good prompt, I'm storing that inside of it's Magical or getmagical.com, and it has placeholders. So what that means is I can have a placeholder that says job title, or a placeholder that says paste transcript here, or all those questions that Renee would happen to be asking. You can actually use that as a placeholder, where now you have your short keystrokes, and we're using the little tilde key because no one uses it for anything. So that's what we're using. And then so you might have the little tilde Q for, whatever you're calling this prompt. And when it comes up in Magical, you see it's on top of ChatGPT or Bard or whatever you're using. And so it shows up, and then it lets you fill in the blanks. And then when you hit enter, all those blanks are filled in that prompt. All you do is hit enter and you get it. So we hired an intern to create a prompt in one short code that from a transcript creates a blog. It creates 10 quotes from that transcript that you can use in Canva or anywhere else. It creates 4 areas of the script for you to cut the video. So it'll tell you where to cut the video and there's an ebook and a checklist. So one prompt with one transcript now will give you, I think it's 20 pieces of content.
Wow.
So if you think you're going to stand out in the content game by creating more of it, I don't think that's a good strategy anymore. And I'm not arguing with you, Brynne. I'm talking about anybody out there who, you've got that covered. That's 20 pieces of content from a single prompt, and we've got the repurposing game down. And so what does that tell you from a content standpoint? It had better be good. It had better be differentiated.
Right.
You had better get it right. You'd better touch some emotional nerve in your listeners, your viewers, your readers, whoever that is, because you're not going to be able to swarm the internet with your content and be ubiquitous anymore, because everybody can be ubiquitous with literally apparently a tilde Q is all it takes to be ubiquitous on the internet now with your content.
Well, I'm gonna push back a little bit, because
Please.
this is based on a transcript, right? So this is not asking AI to go find the content. This is saying, right? So for us, we interview the client and we pull out the magic, right?
I know I'm with you on that. So you're creating it, but now you're magnifying it and putting it everywhere. And so what is happening is that the bar to clear for distribution has just been lowered. You can step over it now. Okay.
Yes.
Which means that you can't put mediocre content everywhere and believe that you are going to succeed. Now, the distribution part used to be a lever. It's no longer a lever. The bar has been lowered. You better have good content, which means you better have something good to say, which means it better be provocative, and you'd better start, get people. You'd better use it to get people to start thinking rather than just getting people to start clicking on
So I think that this is really important, though, because people think I'm going to use AI to create my content, and you guys are both really clear that's not going to cut it.
Can I just say there are 5 elements that have to go into that content in order for it to convert to conversations. The first one is it immediately has to resonate with your buyer. If your content does not resonate with them, even from the title of it, they're gone, right? Like if they're scrolling and they see their title, you have a much higher shot that they'll stop. Number two, it has to create curiosity. They have to want to lean in. And so if you can't get it, curiosity immediately, they're gone. Number three, it needs to teach them something new they didn't know before. If it sounds like everything else, they don't care. Number four, what they just learned needs to get them thinking differently about the way they're doing things today. They may have learned that like elephants come in 17 colors, but if that doesn't affect their business, just learning something new doesn't matter, right? So what they've learned needs to get them thinking differently about their current solution situation. And number five, it needs to create a compelling moment. We cannot start a conversation with a lurker. They have to be engaging. So there has to be some compelling moment that gets them to comment or react or check out our profile or ask us to connect or accept our connection request or follow us if it's on Twitter or whatever that is. We need to move them from, I just consumed your content, to you're worth me reacting and doing something. So now I've come out of the woodwork and you know who I am. And if we can't do those things, to Jeff's point, that content will not land.
So I want to move us from, so content, this is one area we can be using, and there's some really great tools. And Renee, I'm going to jump to you now, but go ahead, Mike. I'll jump to Renee in a second. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to give it a tool. So
give us a tool. Okay.
So two tools that I'm using today. One of them is CapShow, and I'm working on getting away from it with that GPT that I shared, just because it's a little bit more than what we need for the period that we're working through. And what it helps us do is take audio content, convert it into podcast show notes, and then convert that into social media posts, whether they're LinkedIn or Instagram or Twitter or what have you. That's one really cool tool. The tool that I'm super excited about, though, is Opus Clips. Opus Clips, I think, could be used across the board, and they continue to keep adding new functionality there. But imagine as a sales rep that you're sending a short video to your prospect and want to stand out by adding stylized captions into that video. That's what Opus Clips can help you do, and do it immediately. And the problem that it solves for me, the job that it specifically does, is that stylized caption capability. So Opus Clips and CapShow are two tools that are available, and they're Opus Clip is well worth its weight in gold. CapShow, it depends on what you're trying to do with it.
And that's opus.pro if anyone's looking. I think that's opus.pro.
Thank you.
So I want to jump to Renee for a minute. Renee, how much have you played with AI inside HubSpot? Have you done any lead scoring or any of that yet?
Well, lead scoring, HubSpot's lead scoring is kind of like there's a manual algorithm to it. You give points, you take points away. Like you have a lot of that. I wanted to touch a little bit on, I have a lot of tools. HubSpot's coming out with a lot of their AI that they have implemented right now is around content, right? Because no one right answer, right? And lower risk, right? And so communication, helping people communicate, it's a great tool for that, and content falls into that. There are a couple things that I'll just take the same conversation a little bit higher level with some specific tools. There are a couple things that are really important. We just talked about experimenting. We talked about how unique AI is for everybody, right? Like we all come at it a different way. We talked about like how it reflects on what we put in is some of what we're going to get out. You run some brand risk with that, with all this experimentation, with all this uniqueness and this amplifying unique individuals. And so you start running the risk of sounding rather schizophrenic to an audience en masse, right? Like think of a customer journey. They come in, they see marketing, they hear one voice, they go to sales, they hear another voice, they go to customer success, they hear another voice, they get some product marketing, or release notes or things like that. It's all a different voice because everybody's using this individually. And a lot of people have said, okay, sure, I'll reimburse for your plan, or it's okay for you to pay for your plan. I'm going to make a case that it's time now to start putting some process around that. And you need to be thinking about the company tone and voice. And there are some tools that help with that. So Grammarly, Brynne mentioned the Chrome extensions. Grammarly is like my security blanket, like the little kid in Peanuts that doesn't go anywhere without the blanket. I don't go anywhere without Grammarly except my mobile because I don't like their keyboard, the Grammarly keyboard on iOS. But other than that, I have the Grammarly extension. So everywhere I type, and this all started in 2018 or 2019 because I got tired of my CEO finding errors in things that I took him. And I was like embarrassed. And I was like, that's it. So I think it was 2018. So like since that time, I've had Grammarly as my security blanket. Grammarly has a team plan. And you can do this inside of ChatGPT. There are other tools that you can do too. So if you have a team plan with ChatGPT, which I think only requires 2 or 3 people, we aren't talking about a huge investment, you can then do custom instructions for the team, right? And inside of Grammarly, you can set a tone and voice so that anybody who's using Grammarly and that Chrome extension to kind of cover their back on some decent grammar and spelling errors. Because let's face it, with autocorrect and things like that, we're moving fast. We expect the technology to keep up. Grammarly just does a better job. It's going to help you take out some of those filler words. Like it's going to do more than just commas and periods, right? And spelling. When you do that, those custom instructions for your brand, where you get everybody to kind of like, we don't use this word. I mean, how many times have you said in a sales with your sales teams, we don't use these words, we use these words? Right? Like those kinds of things, you can kind of put that in so that the AI knows that ahead of time so that you're kind of putting some guardrails and some personality to keep that less schizophrenic thing from happening. So you can do that in Canva with like Canva creations. You can do it with Grammarly. You can do it inside of a team plan. So it's really, I think, because we're talking with leadership teams with this podcast, I think that's an important thing to kind of elevate. And that gets you some consistency across the group too. Right. So those are a couple tools and ways to use it. There are also other ones that I think are really important in a niche, like video editing. Descript is like dark magic. I mean, that you can edit based on cutting a word out of a transcript. I mean, there's some really great tools, but I think one of the most important things that I'm seeing right now, and I'll just kind of, almost everybody in this group has talked about ChatGPT and DALL-E, and right, like here's another big risk you run with that. They all sound the same. There's a personality, if you will. I hate to use the word personality, but it's the best placeholder I can use for every AI, right? And the reason you're all thinking there's a tell is because there's a huge number of people using OpenAI, right? You get a totally different flavor when you go. I'm trying not to use personality to amorphize it, but when you go to Claude and you use Anthropic, and when you go to Google and you use Gemini, or when you use other niche tools, you're going to get something a little bit more unique. And there's also some risk in being all in on one of these that they go down, right? So if this is really critical to you, having some other, so just bringing those things higher level and thinking, just like you do with any other part of your business, how does that AI kind of work with? So any of these tools, how do they work together with the other things?
Great.
Yeah, I love that. Everything I put in there in an ever-changing world, right? Like every
well, and like a lot of people don't know DALL-E is coded to give a certain look and feel. Don't use DALL-E for images. It's like tired already. Like you can use it for the same way that you talked about with inspiring for logos and things like that. But if you're using it for every single image, it just has the feeling of DALL-E on purpose at the moment.
Salvador Dali.
Yeah, go to Midjourney. Use Canva, like use some other places, right?
Let's jump to some other tools because I think these are the ones that people are thinking most about, like generically. When I say AI, people think ChatGPT, right? Or they start thinking about. I don't think about Grammarly, but I use it every day. What are some of the other tools in the sales arena that we should be thinking about that are leveraging AI?
There's one
Well, it doesn't
scares me.
Go ahead, guys.
The one that's out there that scares me are some of these coaching tools that are connected to other companies that might be interested in sponsoring this podcast, which include Gong, Chorus, and a number of other ones in the space. But when you look at some of these in the background and what they're coaching on crap behavior. Which
it's aggregated mediocrity.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like we've just seen instances where I had one reach out to me. They wanted me to help promote their stuff in one of those like influencer kind of things. And I said, I'm really not an influencer, but let me take a look at it. When I took a look at it, what they were promoting as positive coaching was coaching really crap behavior. And you could see it in the context of the type of call that they were coaching on. Needless to say, they came back and said, hey, thanks for the feedback, and never came back to me.
No thanks.
Promoting that.
But I think it's really important because I have a lot of qualms about the way that people use Gong, right? So never tell a salesperson what they have to say in what moment, because you're sure to get a salesperson tripping over their tongue and the person on the other end feeling like they're being manipulated, right? So we never want that. But I think there are things about Gong and Chorus AI that maybe are valuable. So if you were going to use it, how would you use a tool like that?
Yeah, I think.
Well, I think when sorry, Mike.
Go, Chris.
No, go ahead, Chris. Yeah,
I think when you look at that, like some of the coaching pieces are fine, knowing that the recording is there. They're looking for certain phrases that you're wrapping up in particular calls, making sure you cover all the key points. All that stuff's helpful. For me, at least the way I have traditionally operated, it would not work in real time to sit there and give me that prompt. I'm going to get distracted by what I'm trying to say because something got hit to me on the screen that, oh, hey, don't forget to do this. And I'm going to be like, that takes me completely out of the flow of where I was at. And maybe it's my ADD or something like that to where I would link onto that and it would mess me up. But I think it creates an unnatural flow. What I think you should look at is, what are the behaviors that I'm looking for? How is it that I can then coach that seller to the right behaviors, not expect a tool to do that coaching for me? That's where when we start talking about AI replacing salespeople and sales leaders, I'm like, if you're trying to remove the conversations, then maybe you're right. But if you're interested in having the conversations with your team, if you're interested in having conversations with your customers and prospects, then AI is not going to replicate that because, frankly, the human brain's just too complex and we're all very different, right? So that's where I would go with that. Sorry, Mike.
Jeff, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I do. Thanks for picking up on my verbal cues, my nonverbal cues, rather. And John, I'm curious, as our tech guru, what you think about this. And I think it goes back to, Chris, what you mentioned and what you referred to is the idea that this is an intern. So if it's an intern, now you're training an intern to train your salespeople. And I don't mind training someone to do the training. I'm not suggesting that's an extra step because it's infinitely scalable and repeatable. But what are these things trained on out of the box? They're trained on the massive amount of mediocre behavior that's out there that is only watering down what we do as people. And it's certainly not going to highlight the nuance of what you want your sellers to be, homing in on. And I've had a bunch of clients that are like, hey, look at this. Use this tool. It's got AI. I'm like, okay, what do you want me to do with it? I think, I don't know, but it's got AI. I mean, that's what we're doing, right? I mean, it's got AI. Go do it. It's like, you don't even know what you're asking it to do. We're not starting with the end and working backward. You're taking a cool buzzword tool, paying a bunch of money for it, committing to a long-term deal because you get a better price. And then you're saying, well, we made this investment. You better use it. That is just the wrong way to go about progress. You're not reverse engineering success. You're taking a risk on something that is unproven and largely poor, but it's really cool. And it's just a bad way to go about making decisions.
Stop you guys a second, because I really want to dig into all the pitfalls and the dangers and the things we need to be thinking about in our next segment. What I want to do now is redirect you back to what are the tools that are out there that people could be using? Go ahead, Brynne, jump in.
I just have to say this quote. I think Jill Rowley said, "A fool with a tool is still a fool."
Yeah. And my friend, I can't think of Chris's last name, who says you're just going to amplify suck.
Yeah. I always say a tool lets you do dumb things faster, right?
But that in mind, let's talk about some of the tools that are out there, because there's some really cool things. So there are predictive tools and there are lead scoring tools, right? There are tools that can dig through the data. Gong can dig through the data and go, hey, we've noticed that when sales reps say this, the conversation sort of goes south. What do we need to learn about that? So let's kind of think about what are the things that are out there? What are the tools we could be using? And what could they do to up our game? What can they do to up our game around sales messaging specifically? Like we could use ChatGPT, but can't we use Copilot in Salesforce to do some of those same things? And have you guys done any of this? Yeah, Brynne, go ahead.
Well, so the one thing, I mean, this is to lead to messaging, and Sales Navigator has a new element called Account IQ, which actually will bring in industry statistics, company statistics. It's pulling it from the web. And then with one click, you have a summary of everything you need as a salesperson to start a conversation. You can now take that summary and stick it into an AI tool and say, hey, how can I use some of these insights to start a meaningful conversation? So a combination of this one-click summary, and whether you're using Bard or Gemini or whatever you decide to use, it's nice that it's like a one-click summary of everything I need about what's going on in the industry, what's going on in this company. It'll say if there, is there a decline in employees or a growth, right? So you get a lot of information in one click. So that, I think there's an AI element to that, but I think in combination with messaging tools, it could be incredibly powerful. That's all.
What else have you guys played with besides ChatGPT and sort of these generic ones? You guys have played with Gong a little bit and sort of seen the goods and the bads of it. What else have you played with? Have any of you played with anything that's doing, predictive lead scoring?
I think one tool that I thought was pretty interesting. I don't use it myself, but some of my marketing customers use it, which is a tool called Synthesia.ai or Synthesia.io or something. Basically what it does is that given any text that you have, you can turn it into a video with an AI avatar talking over it.
Oh yeah.
And what was interesting about that is, again, it's kind of a modern problem which people just don't read today. So you spend all this time doing like a I don't know, 20 slide deck or something like that, or a long white paper or something like that. People just aren't gonna read that. And so if you want to turn that into something that is more consumable friendly, which is a video with a voiceover, that could be something that you could potentially use. I generally try to, I've learned that, if at any time you're sending out like a deck of any kind, you should at least give them the option where it's got a voiceover, because that's probably going to be consumed a little bit better. Now, I will say, again, going back to Bill's comment of like, you probably don't want to do this forever, because to Renee's point, it's all going to sound the same eventually. So you want to have an actual person kind of talk through that. But in the interim, as a stopgap solution, that's pretty good.
So I actually saw a tool like what you're talking about. And what they did was they created an avatar of you. So, and then they take all of your content and they mush it in whatever you do with data. You don't mush it, but you put it all together into a river or a pond or a brook or whatever they call it, a lake, I guess, right? You put it into a lake, and then when somebody asks a question, the AI finds the answer in all of that content that you've created, and it's an avatar that looks like you giving the answer. Have you guys seen that?
That's very cool, though.
I wish I could remember who the maker was of that, because they could sponsor this discussion too.
I'm not seeing that exact same thing, but I'm not seeing that exact thing, but they had a thing on 60 Minutes a couple of weeks ago where they had all of these people who had given basically speeches and came in for interviews and had all this, but then you could interact with them, ask them specific questions, and it would find that part in the interview with that person and they would respond. And I thought that was very similar sort of mechanism, but it was really, really interesting. So it's like you're having a conversation with this person who sometimes in certain cases, that person's not around anymore. So
Yeah.
There's one other tool, Liz, that nobody's really brought up, and it's super obvious and probably the most common case, but there's still a lot of people not using it. So I think it's worth mentioning is transcription tools. So meeting transcription tools, I've been a long time. I think I've been with Otter for about 3 years. So I'm still a big fan of Otter, partially because of how many minutes is in the plan. And I think that matters. And especially with someone like Brynne or I, who like put a lot of things in, more than just the meetings we are in ourselves, we would be putting into that transcription. But there are a lot of people like Fathom instead of Zoom. I've put some clients on that because it was free. There's a free ramp into that, a freemium sort of thing. So having transcriptions of calls, I find allows you to focus a lot more on the call, right? I still take notes. I've been taking some notes while we're all talking, but that's like my cheat sheet to go back into any kind of transcription. So I think that's one that's like still needs to be adopted more. Yeah. And I will say it also leads to unique things we can talk about in the next episode of bots showing up to meetings.
Yeah, that is a funny story. Wait, so I use a program called Read AI Meeting Notes. And it does a couple of things. One is it takes a transcription. Two is it takes the video and cuts it up into small pieces so you can watch an individual part. The other thing is it pulls highlights. Now it's not very good at this yet, and says, these are the things that people committed to do. So if you were doing sales meetings and using that, as long as the other person was okay with you recording, then you can, cut things that they said right into your CRM, take the notes and put them right into your CRM, but it also gives you next action items. So you can take those and put them right into the CRM. Now, what will be brilliant is when it starts doing that for you. But yeah, go ahead, Brynne.
Agents are coming.
Mine does. So I have Sybil.ai. Yep. It's expensive and it's phenomenal. If you say, okay, next step, it grabs it. So you need to know when you're having that conversation, you say, okay, the next step for that is the next step, and it knows. So I have been trained to use it, but it recaps it in an email. Now, I love this, and I love, John, I want to hear the name of that video that you program that you talked about, because I would take my next step email and put that into a video and send that with the verbiage, right? And so we've got a whole bunch of things going. But although it's a little more money than everything else, I think Sybil AI is amazing. It's also, so we have 4 people on it as a team, and I can make calls available. I can listen to my team's calls when they have prospecting calls. And this is my favorite part from this perspective. It marks when someone nods and when someone smiles.
Wow.
So I can say, you closed this 10 minutes before you knew you closed it. Right. Right. And so it's a great tool like that. Anyway, I will move on, but I can't say enough, Sybil AI.
So we're running out of time here on this conversation. I want to add just a couple of things to think about. So there are AI tools that are doing a lot of really cool things for sales. And we all, just to show how new this is, a lot of us are just learning to use them too. So like I said, there's lead scoring and prioritization. HubSpot, Apollo, Pardo, Salesforce have these components in them as we learn to use them. Forecasting, HubSpot does some, Salesforce, H2O, AI Cloud, Neptune, like these are all that are going to help you take that data and turn it into forecasts. Personalized outreach and messaging. HubSpot is doing some of this now. HubSpot is really owning this AI space. They're really trying to figure out where to put it, and learning to use it all is, I think, overwhelming.
Liz, can I add one thing? Like if you, Dharmesh Shah, who's the technical co-founder of HubSpot, talks about a lot of this journey and what they're doing and what he's tinkering with on LinkedIn in particular. So you might want to follow him if you're interested in what HubSpot's doing, because he kind of talks through the whys.
I love it.
Yeah. So, these are things to watch as we're using our CRMs. There are already tools like ChatSpot and Exceed. I haven't used either of those, But I've talked to other people who are working on these. If this is what's happened so far in this opportunity, your next step might be this, right? So sort of looking for, hey, if this one's stuck, maybe try this. So looking for trends in our CRMs, in our conversations, that will help us look at next steps. But I think there's one really critical piece to all of this. As we're using these larger tools, as we're using them for prediction, as we're using them for forecasting or for telling us what to do next, if people aren't using the CRM and putting the information in, it is just pulling arbitrary nonsense, and it won't be accurate. It won't be useful. So we have to really use it. It's still data in, garbage in, garbage out. That hasn't changed. So the more accurately we use our CRMs, the more accurately these other tools are going to start working. Any other kind of, Bill, you've been really quiet. Any other final words about what tools we could be using?
Yeah, I'll put a tag at the end. All these tools are great. I've not used many of them. I've messed around with Sidebeam a little bit for presentations. And of course, ChatGPT and so on. Here's what AI doesn't do. Questions from the client in real time. So just be careful about how much you send out that you think is going to be self-explanatory, and you don't have to know it and internalize it, because when Q&A comes, I'm in a professional speakers group too, and everybody in the beginning was all freaked out about, what happens when AI can replace what I'm going to talk about? I don't know, but I can tell you this: when Q&A comes and people want to follow up, we'll see how much, AI could be your enemy at that point, because I don't know, I haven't, but I can tell you in 10 minutes if I can. No, we want to know right now. Like, what do you know? So just be careful about over dependency. Still kind of falls on.
That kind of reminds me what Renee started to talk about, which is, as we begin to rely on these note takers. Renee, was it you that showed up in the meeting and there were only note takers?
Yeah. So I showed up. I showed up in a meeting with a client, and we got there, and it was where prospects can interact and ask questions. And the note taker, it follows these AI agents, right? And the next step beyond chat is agents, AI taking action for you, right? This agent that will go do a step for you. That's what the next thing. So these agents are really good. You've integrated them. They're in your calendar. They're in your Zoom. You've told it to be there. It doesn't matter that you had a flat tire or running late from your last call or whatever. It shows up, right? So the note takers show up when people don't, right? And sometimes it's by design, because we have an internal meeting and we know we can't be there, and this is how we're going to be up to speed. And sometimes we forget with an external meeting, and we decided, well, we have multiple note takers that showed up, even though the people don't. They're still prospects. They still get the email synopsis. I mean, we're here. So we just kind of turned it into like an interview with the COO, so that I could, use it for the marketing content, but also because we knew that the sale, like, we got to do whatever we wanted if they're note takers. But this is like a new protocol and a new etiquette that will come along, because as we get more into the agent world, like, we're going to have to think about what happens when the AI takes actions without us being present.
So, and I think that's a great place to wrap this up and think about leading into our next conversation, which is going to be about what we started to talk about. Like, what are all of the pitfalls and dangers and things to think about? So let's stop this here. And let's start now. Everybody reset. Okay. So this is the Sales SOS podcast. This is Liz Heiman, and I have a group of amazing sales experts with me here right now. And we're talking about using AI in sales. And right now, what we want to focus on is, what are the pitfalls? What are the dangers? What are the things we really need to be thinking about? And in the last two conversations that we had, if you missed them, we were talking about tools, and we were talking about how to use AI. And some of this conversation has already come up a little bit in those two, but I think it's time to really lean into, what do we need to know as leaders, as CEOs, as sales leaders, as people actually using the tech? what are the things we need to know? What are the things we need to be wary about? What are the things we need to take precautions or do things differently? And I'm not sure who wants to lead off this conversation. Renee is ready to jump in.
I have a
and
big
tell
one.
us what not to do.
If you are not super savvy in AI, if your company is not really prepared for this and doesn't understand it deeply, please do not put your AI out customer facing. It is not ready for it. Right? Like, I'll just share a couple horror stories of some of the people who've thought about this just to kind of set the stage for why not customers. So one car dealership last year decided, oh, we'll do a little quick chat bot and people can find and ask questions, put a little guardrails, but essentially probably thinking of it like a little GPT, right? Pre when GPTs came out, this was in December. So they put a chat bot out there on their homepage of their website and people could talk about cars, right? You know what people figured out? It was a free back door to OpenAI, and coders were going in and they hit their limit. They didn't want to put the charges on their API. They were using that API connection into OpenAI and charging up huge bills of getting the AI to do whatever they wanted it to do, right? So there's an expense risk right there, right? Another car dealership put it in there to interact with customers. It's always car dealers. I'm sorry. sorry to pick on them. But the next thing that happened is it started negotiating the price of a car. And it almost went into legal battle for somebody's trying to get a car for $1. So there are a lot of risks that unless you understand it well and understand how to put the guardrails, for the most part, don't put it out there for customers. Secondly, if you haven't trained your staff, what are you doing putting it out there with customers? You need to train your staff first. So I'll just start us off with those little horror stories.
Who wants to go next? John, I think you had some things that you wanted to say about being cautious or being thoughtful.
Yeah, definitely. Renee had mentioned it in an earlier episode where AI can have these hallucinations. So what that basically means is when you ask it to, and a lot of it we talk about, creative AI, right? That's really good for those types of things. But when you're asking it very specific things during a summary, I've learned, here's an actual example. I asked ChatGPT to summarize a white paper, pull out the top 3 stats in the white paper, the top 3 quotes in the white paper. That way we can take action on it. And as you can imagine, it gave me some stuff. And I thought it was really good. It was really compelling. And so I was like, okay, well, I'm going to take action on that. But then I just happened to be like, let me go check to see where in the white paper it listed those stats, where in the white paper it came up with those quotes. And guess what? I didn't find them. They were nowhere to be found in that white paper.
Right.
And so I was like, where did this come from? And imagine if I actually did something with that, or if I posted about that, if I put my brand behind that, that would have been a really bad mistake. And so to Renee's point, a lot of the things that you do have to put safety rails around it, not just customer facing, but also if you're actually doing key actionable research on these things, you do have to double check it for sure.
Can I piggyback on that?
Go ahead, Brynne.
So just quickly, I put in almost every single prompt in that case, research this white paper or use this white paper only, do not research or pull data from anywhere else. That often will fix that, not every time because they still hallucinate, but that I put that, use this transcript only, do not research. I do it all the time. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I like that.
Yeah, I was going to just piggyback on John's thing. I actually, when I first started working with ChatGPT, I asked it to give me a summary and key points from my doctoral dissertation, and which is 340 pages or something along those lines. And some of the stuff it came back with was right on. Some of it was like, that's not in there. I don't know where you pulled that. I don't know where you pulled that from. Sounds good.
You know,
But-
even if you ask it for sources and then you click through the sources, a lot of times those links are broken. So it's a little odd right now, but I'm hoping it'll get better.
You know, I think you using your dissertation is a perfect example of particularly leadership, right? Like when you're talking about using this with your teams, one of the safest ways to know that to know your way around a hallucination, because it can be a feature, it can make it more creative, right?
Sure.
Not just a bug. So when you know what you're putting in, then like Brynne knows the transcript. She was there. She did the interview, right? Like somebody who was there knows what's there and can recognize something that's off. Your dissertation, you knew every word of that. You put blood, sweat, and tears into that thing. So you knew when it went off the rails, right? When you ask it to do things where you don't have expertise, you just need to recognize you're getting into a higher risk scenario, right? And you need to be sure that you're confirming other things. So those two things, that no one right answer, and do I have the expertise to recognize, or the person I'm asking to do this, right? Like Brynne, you mentioned that you gave an intern a task to do. Like, you know, if they were the one doing the interview.
Reed, we did that. Sorry. Go ahead.
But so like if they have listened to the whole interview, then they can probably do it and make sure it doesn't go off the rails. That's fine. But there's still that step of making sure you actually know. I think that's an important piece.
Yeah, I want to jump down to the guys here in a second, but I do want to say that it's not just the data that, you know, it makes stuff up, but it actually changes the meaning. So you put in a sentence or you put in a paragraph or a whole whatever, and you say, make this a little more compelling, make it a little more interesting, make it a little bit easier to read. And then you read through it and it has changed the meaning of what you wrote. So maybe it sounds better, but it doesn't say the same thing. So being really careful about reading what it says. Yeah.
Right. Can I add to do that? Sometimes if you're just chatting with it, make it more compelling, but you can now edit, right? You could go back to that original prompt. And I have found when you add to that original prompt in the edit versus continuing the conversation, it's a lot closer to the original response than like kind of taking it off the rails.
Yeah.
But I will say, when you get a good prompt, keep it, record it. That's the hardest part of any of this, is really getting the prompt that, because if it does a good job the first time, it will do a great job over and over and over again. If you see an error in it and you correct it, it's just getting down to those great prompts. And that's why I don't know how many hours it took her to do, but her job was to get these prompts to work on a transcript. Once we had it and it worked, now it works with every transcript. So it's really about being an excellent prompt engineer. She's a marketing major at Wisconsin, like smart as anything, right? But it was a task, right? It was a task to get one prompt to do all of that. But now it's great. And we use it over and over and over again. And going back to, I think it was in the first episode of the podcast when Jeff mentioned it's got to be high quality. Once you have that prompt, all you have to do is focus on the quality of the content. You don't have to think about the other stuff anymore, right? And the last thing back, and this is sort of what they don't do, you know, this is the mistakes or the foibles, is that they don't tap into their genius. They're now relying on AI, right? So the best thing, just to finish kind of this topic, which is what's wrong is people are getting lazy and they're not tapping into their expertise and their brilliance. And we all have made it, AI is too new to say AI helped us make it, right? We've all made it in business because we had a specialty at something. We were really, really good at it. We need to capture that more, whether it's in conversations with your clients. And now, you know, Renee's talking about having, you know, the otters, the Sybils, like the Fathoms. And you can now take your genius from your client conversations and convert that into content, as long as you're not mentioning the client, right? But that's, I think, the biggest mistake is we think that AI can help us not have to think as hard. And I actually think AI is just helping us synthesize what we're thinking about and how we're leveraging it. So that's where I think it's going wrong. Okay. I'm done.
It might be said that you never sell better than when you sell like you.
This authenticity thing people
You
keep
can use
talking
that in
about.
business, Jeff.
Yeah.
Consider that as a tagline or
That's
something.
absolutely
I don't
right.
know.
Almost, or maybe a registered trademark. I don't know.
Maybe. There you
Yeah.
go, Jeff. No, I
Um,
think it's important, Jeff. Take us further down that path.
the number one mistake, we're coming in. What are the mistakes people make? And everybody so far has touched on this, so I don't want to restate things, but in my own words, I guess I'm restating it. But people assume that AI has better capabilities than it really does, at least right now.
Mhm.
And people also forget that you will never, regardless of how intelligent something becomes in a binary manner, you will never be able to recreate the chemistry between two human beings. We noticed this during COVID when we took all of our in-person meetings and we put them on digital video platforms, right? Maybe like Zoom, not a sponsor. Maybe like Microsoft Teams, not a sponsor. Maybe like, any other platform. And we could see body language, we could see facial expressions, we could hear words, we could make presentations, but there was something missing and we couldn't quite articulate it. That is the thing that I firmly believe, I'll die on this hill. That is the thing that a computer will never be able to recreate. And so when we go into all the magic that makes you you, when we go into all the little things that you do, that don't settle for some watered down version of don't settle for a watered down version of what a salesperson should look like. And this thing just popped into my head right now. It's like your favorite artist. You buy their greatest hits CD. I'm dating myself now, but you listen to their greatest hits album. It's a distilled version. It's a watered down version of all the stuff that everybody liked. But when you go deep into the deep cuts, from that artist, that's what you like the most. That's the stuff that, you share this song with somebody else. They won't have any idea why it's such a great song or such a great piece of art, but you do because you have this connection. And AI will never be able to replace that connection. And that's what I think we need to remember. We need to think about this technology as something that can help us in tremendous ways, but we can't give it more credit for stuff that it doesn't deserve. And there will be some things that you'll just never be able to remove between two humans in an interaction. So just know what it is and know what it will never be.
I think that's right on.
It's the working girl. See, I cite movies from 100 years ago so that nobody else knows what they are. But there's a scene in Working Girl from the 80s, Harrison Ford, Melanie Griffith, where you might remember she goes up the elevator with the big boss of this radio conglomerate, and Harrison Ford looks at her and says, "You're on. 2 minutes is all you get." And he questions her, "When did you first get this idea?" And she pulls out these folders and starts thumbing through. "I saw this newspaper article, which led me to that, which got me thinking, wow, these two parties together might." And by the time the elevator's door opened, her boss is played by Sigourney Weaver, and Sigourney Weaver had been taking this idea as hers, right, to making it look like she's the smart one. So he asks her, just curious, when he gets out of the elevator to the Sigourney Weaver character, "When did you first get the idea for this?" Crickets. Gee, I have to go back to my file and remember. Just generally, I mean, it wasn't in the news or anything. Point is, when you build your own rationale, when you know it and own it, all the chat GPT and all the AI stuff helps, but you better have a theorem and you better have an approach that you own, because that's when it'll stand up to the tightest inspection. So,
well, I mean, I always say whenever you're in a sales process, you get to a certain point where somebody's going to want to play stump the chump, and the chump's usually the sales guy, right? And when they get to that point, if you don't know that next couple of clicks down, good luck. Either hopefully you have the other guy in the room that does know it, or you can only tap it for so long.
That's it, Chris. Yep.
So, and does AI know when to ask that next question? Does AI know when to say, I'm hearing this hesitance in your voice. Tell me what's going on back there. Like, does AI know when to go, last time we talked about this, you were really excited, and today you're looking a little hesitant, or, hey, tell me how so-and-so is going to feel about this. Like, AI can do it, but if AI starts asking you about feelings, you're like, you don't care about my feelings, AI. You don't care about, right? You can't.
Well, you can program it to do that,
But
right?
it will never care. AI will never care
Never.
about you. I think that's a thing that we're missing, right?
Mhm.
When I buy from somebody, I want to know that they want me to be successful, right? I want to know that they care that this is actually going to work for me. AI
You're
will never
invested.
care about me as a human being. It can't. Go ahead, Mike.
Check out air.ai if you haven't checked it out. There's a demo call of basically basic objection handling by an AI tool with someone who's in the process of purchasing. I think it's the Apple headset. So check out air.ai. It's the one that they post on it. And I don't know how real it is, but it seems real and it sounds interesting. As we're talking about the challenges though, and the risks, if I say Thomas Brothers Guide, how many people know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Right? Okay, there we go. So there used to, so Jeff, back probably when you were too young to drive, there was this thing that we had in our vehicles called the Thomas Brothers Guide, and we would use it to get around places like Southern California, as an example. And you have to go from page 61 to page 96 if you were going west, and maybe page 27 if you were going north, but you'd have to navigate through it. You'd have to know how to use this thing. If I handed a Thomas Brothers Guide to my kids, I don't know that they'd know what to do with it. And that's a problem, considering that sometimes they drive out in places where you might not have cell phone reception. So when you think of tools like this, what happens in that worst scenario where we no longer have cell phone reception? What tool do we use? And if I don't know how to use a Thomas Brothers Guide, or I don't know how to use a map, I might be in trouble if I'm reliant on my GPS.
Especially if I don't know how to tell which way is north or south or east without my
Follow the sun. But what I'll say, I mean, there are things that are going extinct, right? Like the need to read a map. But my kids who are 21 were the last of their class to learn cursive. Except, right? So the people behind them that are 20, the only thing they learned how to do was sign their name. They cannot read script. And I think the idea is they don't need it. Everything is typed. No one's handwriting this stuff anymore. And to me, it's a travesty. Like, what do you mean you can't read or write in cursive? Right. But they don't need it. And as much as like in map, I mean, in 6th grade, we learned how to read a map. Like we had in social studies, we had weeks and weeks on how to read a map. That was a thing, but they don't really need it anymore. And I'm going to say in the next generation, they won't even print maps. So
it's like sharing Clueless when she's like, why do I have to learn to parallel park? Every place you go to has valet anyway.
Right. And now it's a self-parking car.
My new car does this. I haven't tried it yet. Renee, what are you going to say?
I just wanted to add a little bit of a perspective on something else to think about. Same kind of thing, like about dependency, but also kind of flipping that a little bit about what kind of experience are we creating? We talked about for customers, right? The guardrails for customers, but also what kind of experience are we creating for our teams if we're bringing AI into the mix? So we know, and I believe you talked about in the very beginning, there's a lot of fear around AI and what it's going to do their job. But we also know from looking in the last decade, 2 decades for sure, but the last decade a lot, how many of your sales teams get mad at having to spend time in technology? I mean, your marketing teams, I know there's enough, right? Like it's become a very technical job. your sales teams, that's not what they've gotten into the business to do often, right? So we need to think about the experience and which pieces we're offloading to AI and which pieces are high value for our people to be involved in. So Liz, when you were talking about those signals, right? Like how do you, like that's why people get into sales. They want to interact with people and use their people skills and really build that connection, right? That's not what we want to. There are tools out there that are reading people's emotions and things like that. There's a whole discussion about whether that's ethical if they don't know that's happening, right? So there's that side of the risk, but there's also like, what does that say to the salesperson if you're saying we're offloading that to a piece of technology that can do this better for you? Like there's a lot of tedium that we can start with that they would love for us to take off their plate and let their superpowers shine through.
Okay, last, who wants to have the final say on what do we need to be cautious of? What do we need to remember about using AI?
Don't use it as a crutch. Use it as a tool to help you get better, not to take away. Don't use it as a crutch. You know what that means.
Yeah, and I think my final word is AI is using what is already there. If what is already there isn't good, it's using what isn't good. And we talked about this when we talked about Gong. You know, I have a friend who's an attorney who said, scares me to death because even if it doesn't even if the AI doesn't hallucinate, if it goes out into the world and it pulls bad briefs, content from bad briefs, now I'm using content from bad briefs. So it's everybody's stuff out there. It's the whole world, and not the whole world is who you want to be pulling from. You know, you want to use what makes you unique and special. And Jeff, it sounds like looks like you have one more thing to say. No? All right.
No, but thanks.
All right. So let's wrap this one up there. Everybody, take a breath. Okay. So now whoop, I'm echoing. Okay. So hi, this is the Sales SOS podcast. This is Liz Heiman, and I am here with Brynne Tillman. What? SOS? Sales.
SOS in sign language.
In sign language. This SOS Sales podcast, Sales SOS podcast. Let's just start this over. Okay, here we go. Hi, I'm Liz Heiman, and this is the Sales SOS podcast, and we are talking about using AI in sales. And today we're going to talk about governance, or about what things do we need to put in place, what guardrails do we need to put in place as we're talking about AI. And I have with me Brynne Tillman, Gannon, Renee Bigelow, John Way, Jeff Bajorek.
Hey there.
Mike Simmons.
Hello.
Chris Bowen. And
Howdy.
This is one really smart group of people who have some really incredible things to say. So let's begin. We've been talking about AI for 3 episodes now. This is our 4th episode, and we've talked a lot about what's out there, how you can use it, and what are the things we should be thinking about. We're going to, in the next about 20 minutes, we're really going to talk about what are some ways we can put guardrails in place. What are some of the governances? If you're running a business or running a team, what do you need to do to make sure that they are not off the rails? Brynne wants to start. She's ready to go.
So I think the first thing a company needs to do is add this to your handbook. Like, you know, we have, you know, right. Like, it's simple, but we have guardrails from our, you know, social media perspective, our client information perspective. Companies need to start using this or grabbing compliance and having people sign off on it, right? Like, I have read and I understand the company's position on using this, right? There are so many people that are literally putting in client information. My client, ABC company, is challenged with this, and I'm looking to help them with a solution. And that is now public data. That is not like ChatGPT and everybody, all these AI, they're learning from every word that everyone is putting in here. And companies need to make sure that their staff understands this. And the answer, by the way, is not to block ChatGPT, because they can still use it on their phone and they can still use it on their home computer. So it's not, hey, let's just stick our head in the sand. It's like, let's deal with this head on. And here, if you want to work here, you need to sign this that says you understand our policies around AI.
I think
Yeah, go ahead, Jeff.
two things. We talked about this, I think it was episode 1. Who's training the intern and who's checking the intern's work? And it should probably be 2 different people.
So in case you didn't watch episode 1 and 2,
Well, then you should go back and watch episode 1 and 2 and then come back. We'll wait. But it's
Or listen,
AI
it's a podcast, but that's okay.
right. It's if you think about AI as a very highly an intern with a very high ceiling, an intern with a ton of potential, recognize that the inputs will lead to better outputs. It's still a garbage in, garbage out kind of situation here. So with that said, you need to make sure that you don't make too many assumptions, that you don't give it more credit than it deserves, and that you put your own ego on the line and you're willing to check your own work. Now, in order to remove some of that bias, because who wants to do this if you're running a company or if you're running a sales organization or if you're just trying to manage a territory, have somebody train the intern, have somebody else check the intern's work. Doesn't always need to be the same people on the front end and the back end, but there should always be someone at those posts. Otherwise you're abdicating your responsibility. It's just not the right thing.
I think also to that point there that we also kind of talked about, you would never have the intern talk to a news reporter. You would never have the intern talk to the CEO of a company. You would never have the intern be the first connection in terms of a sale. Like, you would just never do that.
So good.
So hard to Renee's point. Some people are doing that, and that's kind of bizarre. You would have training for that. I think to another point is that if some, there are people that are highly confident of ChatGPT or whatever AI it is, then fine. Do the same thing that you would do an intern, which is, let's go through a fishbowl test, and then we're going to give you some questions, and let's see how you respond. And then you go, oh no, guess what? You're not field ready. So maybe at a minimum, do something like that before you put something out into the world, and that becomes the latest news PR crisis or whatever it is.
I think the same thing that you see with a lot of technology and the ability to do things faster is it's real easy to encode your organizational biases that you may not realize exist if that's what you're training it on. And so if you're a company that has ERGs and you're trying to handle some very different audiences, perhaps have them test run some of that to make sure it makes sense. If your ICP for a certain thing that's significant to your company is the chief marketing officer or the chief revenue officer, have them see, hey, does this thing kick back the answers that I would expect to see or what have you? Like, slow down a little bit so that maybe in the long term you can go a little bit faster.
Some stress testing.
That's right.
Yeah. I would like to add to, Liz, I haven't heard anybody say training. And I think a lot of people think because there is a consumer-facing product on this technology, because it's inexpensive, because it's a lot of hype around it, that everyone really understands how to use it and how to get beyond mediocre and how you want them to use it. And a lot of people are doing the same thing that we expected with social media, which is, oh, if you go use it personally, then you're going to understand how to use it at work. And that's not the case. There are a lot of crossovers that I see in governance with the emergence of social media. For the first time, employees were able to talk publicly, right, to a public audience in a broadcast kind of manner. And originally, I worked in media at the time, and we had conversations about who owned that account, right? Did that account, was it owned by the reporter, or was it owned by the media company, right? Those things all evolved, and they sound very like antiquated conversations, but we're running into some of the same things. So if you have employees using ChatGPT on a personal plan and they're doing planning and stuff for your company, who's going to own that, right? If you are trying to copyright or trademark something and the AI was involved or it ingested things, like you can run into a lot of areas. So you really need to make sure that you've got some people that you bring in or have on your team that have a really good understanding, and you're training for the behaviors you want, because it is the wild, wild west. And there's a lot of hype. And if they're out there listening to hype, then they can really go awry really easy. And it's not their fault if you're not training.
We have a company account. Now, I haven't used it well yet, but there are 3 of us that are on that account. And so as this progresses, if the company owns an AI account, so I'm looking at this from, there's LinkedIn and there's Sales Navigator. If people work in Sales Navigator, the company owns that data. They work in their personal LinkedIn, they don't. And so I think as AI kind of grows, there will be here, if you are going to do anything about the company, it's got to be in the company's version that we have, we have sight into. We can see what's going on across the board. And in your personal, you are not allowed to mention that you're an employee here. You can't mention anything on your personal account. And so I think that could be the next evolution of how companies can control that.
And I wouldn't advocate for racking up lots of lawyer hours on any subject, but a little primer on what Deloitte and some Deloitte's one example, their legal area, but there's tons of legal stuff that's already been declared. That's public information about the risks of AI. If you want to go the inexpensive way, read up on some of that. It's terribly dry in some ways, but it might just save you from putting yourself in harm's way. Might as well go to
Ask
the people that
GPT to write your handbook.
Yeah,
exactly.
I mean, and if Deloitte's interested in sponsoring the program, I mean, I know some people.
This is not sponsored by Deloitte. I just want to point that out. But
So I really like Deloitte, though.
but we are open to that. No, so you might as well go to the pros for some of this and get yourself a leg up on your governance. I mean, so you know where you're operating from.
So one of the things that we know about salespeople, and everyone here will admit that they do it, when salespeople don't know the answers to stuff, they make it up.
Yeah.
Right? So now, not only do we have salespeople making stuff up, we have ChatGPT making stuff up.
For the salespeople who make it up, which is
right.
double
So
makeup.
we want to be really careful about making sure that at the very highest level, our vision, our values, our mission are clear. Everybody understands it. It's part of all of the content that goes out. But in terms of individual products, what's true, what's not true, what can it do, what can it do? Because if you let ChatGPT or any other AI tool start making stuff up, you're going to really have a problem. So it becomes even more important that the product team and the sales team and the marketing team are in agreement. And somehow, I don't know how you bring the AI in alignment with that, because it's the wild, wild west, but we want to be super careful about that.
Am I the only one out here who is comfortable with saying I don't know? Like I don't think I make stuff up anymore. Maybe when I was younger, I did.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people. I haven't made anything up in forever.
10, 20 minutes.
I don't do it. No.
Also, though, by the way, the Mandela.
I do make stuff up on the golf course. Like I make up these creative ways.
Yeah, like your scores.
Like your score.
I've seen it.
Yeah. No, but we do know salespeople do this. I mean, it is
all the time.
All the time.
I really like, just to reinforce that point that was made a little bit earlier, you would never. In security, it's one of the things to do when you're leading organizations is put an I will never list out there. And it's a good one to do with your family too. An I will never list, because there's so many different bad actors out there that are trying to get us to do certain things. And this whole you will never approach can help make things really, really clear around how you interact with each of these tools. Clarity, lead your people well.
Liz, I'll also add in, I kind of put a lot of the guardrails and, maybe sounded a little heavy-handed on we really need to do training, but there's also a real opportunity to get to see some leadership from your team and people that want to run with this, right? Like that can help with it. Like we're talking about, let's ask ChatGPT, right? Why not ask somebody on your team who's really getting excited about this to help put together tiger teams? And you mentioned resource groups, right? Like bring them in and help them. This is a frontier. You survive on the frontier as a group much better than you do alone. Right. So there's a real opportunity around that in the governance part, right? Like what makes sense for us to do? What have you thought about? Where are some of the risks? What are some of the things that, how can we make this easier? How can we improve the experience? I think there's a lot of opportunity there that's kind of not happening in a lot of places because we as leaders are also wrapping our head around this at the same time. And we're used to being sort of in front and getting our head around it and then talking to our team. And this might need to be it's moving so fast. This might need to be a place where we change that approach.
Okay. Any last thoughts on, from a leadership perspective, what guide rails do we need to put in place? What prompting, what encouraging do we need to do to get our team to safely use AI?
I think we mentioned this in one of the earlier podcasts, but we haven't mentioned it in this one. So just in case somebody missed those, if you don't have an instance of an AI that is private, that is not used on training data, that your inputs and outputs are not part of the training data, you need to be sure that you're stripping PII.
So explain that. Explain what you said.
Yeah, PII is personal identifiable information. Right. And we already strip it for things like ad targeting and things like that. Right. If you have a platform, I say I'm again speaking from my years in media, like when we would target customers, we would put them in buckets. Right. But not, hey, Brynne, we're going to send you an ad. It was Brynne is in this bucket of salespeople. Right.
Wait, hang on 1 second. So this whole idea of a private instance, I don't think people even know that exists.
Oh. So when you have corporate accounts, you can do different. So there's all of us who have a consumer login and are buying this as a consumer, as an individual consumer, and using ChatGPT or Anthropic and Claude or Gemini, right? Any of these, whether we're using the free accounts or paying. Those are public instances of the large language model. And unless you've set a setting or requested to opt out, and some of these are in different, everyone has a different mechanism and a different level of privacy, every different service and AI company, right? Unless you have gone through the steps to get yourself removed from your input, removed from training data, whatever those steps are, then whatever you're putting into the AI can be ingested for it to learn. And that could be someone's private information. And so you don't want personal identifiable information, name, address, phone number, things like that. Like it'd be really great to get it to help you to structure some data around that sort of thing. What you need in order to do that is to have a private instance that is hosted through an API key where you are not, your information isn't getting shared back to the model, right, for training. You can also then fine tune your instance so that it's more grounded in your own documents and things like that, that you put tighter guardrails. This is why I say, unless you understand these things, you shouldn't be putting it out there for customers, right? Like,
so you're saying if we have a brand new product in production that is, super, super secret product, we shouldn't be going to ChatGPT to help us come up with the language around what this super secret thing does.
So some companies have had the equivalent of like some corporate espionage because other people are back-ending in to try and find out information, right? Like assume that it's almost like putting a microphone to things. I'm not the person John could probably come up with some of these ways that you could prompt engineer into a backdoor or try to get into other information. That I don't spend my time on things like that. So I haven't done it. I'm just aware that it happens, right? And so when I'm working with client data, I strip out the client, if it's a transcript or something, and if it's going to be public, right? If it's like Brynne, your podcast transcript, the podcast is fully public. You're cutting that up into different strategic pieces of content. That's public. I wouldn't be as worried about that, right? Like that's going to be on the internet. It's likely going to be scraped. But if it's private, like a customer conversation where a customer is sharing their confidential data because they need to give it to you in order for you to sell to them, like that's where you want to be more careful of the PII. That is a lot to kind of throw in, Liz, but I hope I answered your questions.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to wrap this up. And I think the one thing that we're all saying that I keep hearing is if it could stop and think about what could go wrong. Like what could happen here? And chances are it probably could happen. So thinking through what could go wrong and then building guide rails around how do we prevent that from happening with our team. I want to thank you guys for joining me today. This has been great fun at the Sales SOS podcast. We'll be back. I think our next topic will be CRM. I'm excited to start talking about that. So I'll see you guys all next week.
Next month.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks.
Oh,
Bye,
listen
guys.
next week. Bye, guys.